about you, but I like to think that I'm in total control of my life. Until, of course, something happens that makes me realize I'm not, and then I freak out. I lose it, and I start to worry a lot. But I wouldn't exactly call myself a worrywart because I'm a woman of action. Although there was this one time when a wart caused me a great deal of worry. See, after college, I moved across the country. I traded the streets of Baltimore for the beaches of San Diego. And I put all my career plans on hold, and I took a job tending bar. And I made drinks. I made friends. I got a tan. Because I was living in the land of no worries and beautiful people, and I cared about nothing more than the way I looked. So one day, when I noticed an odd little bump on my thumb, it plagued me. And although it was no bigger than a freckle, I became obsessed. And one of the waitresses I worked with took a look at it and said, "Oh, that? No worries. It's just a wart." No worries? A wart? Seriously, how do you get a wart? More importantly, how do you get rid of a wart? So I set to action. I applied creams and special little wart Band-Aids, and I prayed that it would just go away. But it didn't. It got bigger, and it got callus-like, so I would pick at it all the time and get really pissed off. And then one night, in a moment of total desperation and craziness, I just grabbed a pair of cuticle scissors and I went at it. Sufficient to say, you're never prepared for how much a small wart can bleed. So I went to the doctor, and on my first visit, they froze it off. Great, but it came right back. So the next time I went, they froze it and they cut it. But nothing worked. And the third time the wart appeared on my thumb, it brought friends. It was still just one wart, but it had all these offshoot warts that were having a wart party, and I was having none of it. I tried to hide it all the time. I did everything with my left hand, which just made it awkward, drop stuff, and then I tried to just cover it. I wrapped it with a Band-Aid. But the Band-Aid got dirty and wet behind the bar, and it went from being gross to being a health code violation when it slipped off in the ice one day while I was making drinks. And when my manager walked up to me and handed me a small bag of finger condoms, I was horrified. And it's hard to explain the shame of the finger condom to people not in the restaurant industry. They're usually reserved for chefs in the back of the house where no one can see so they don't bleed into your salad after they cut themselves. But in the front of the house, it's just a big blue piece of latex on your hand while you're trying to talk to people, show them what's going on. And people couldn't take their eyes off my thumb. No matter how big I smiled or how low cut my tops were, my thumb stole the show. So I just lost it. I freaked out. And the last resort was laser treatment, okay? Electrodesiccation. All I heard was electrocution. And that sounded like a great idea. I was a total fan of the death penalty. Because this was no ordinary wart. This wart competed for attention even without the finger condom because it was like the size of a bar olive. And it looked like someone stuck a piece of wet cauliflower on my thumb. So they zapped the wart. But true to form, it came back. Oh, it came back. And this time, it was like the laser just jolted it into action. It was bigger and badder than ever before. And I panicked. I literally thought that the wart was going to take over my thumb, and then my hand, and then spread all over my body like the tree man from Indonesia on YouTube. Yeah, that guy. Remember that guy? So I knew there was only one logical next step. I needed to find a witch doctor. And that is easier than you think it is. So I went to Canada, and I took a flight to these tiny islands off the coast, and I found this tribe of Kuna Indians, and they were amazing. I was totally fascinated by their lives, the way they lived primitively and off the land. But more importantly, I wanted to know who healed them. And I had heard that there was this amazing doctor there, and he would heal all the villagers, no matter what their ailment, from a broken leg to mental illness or craziness, and every once in a while, the odd visitor. So when I arrived, I unwrapped my sandy Band-Aid, and I showed them this monster of a wart, and they said, oh yeah, he'll see you. And I honestly don't know what I expected from a witch doctor, but I think I expected like feathers and beads and nakedness and maybe magic and smoke, but I did not expect that a tiny man in a Yankees baseball cap and a Nike t-shirt would be my savior. He walked in and he said nothing. He took my hand in his and he looked at the wart. He scratched it and he sniffed it and he put it down. But I couldn't control myself because I needed him to know through the language barriers that this was no ordinary wart. Like, this wart had been cut and it grew back. This wart had been frozen and it grew back. This wart had been electrocuted and it always came back. So he nodded, he got up, he said a few words, and he left. They told me that he had to go around to other islands and collect medicine and he'd be back in a few days. And I waited. And when he returned, he had 2 vials. He had a black powder like charcoal, and he had a slimy algae, and it smelled like sewer, but I wanted it. He said to wipe it onto my wart, to pack the powder, and to wrap my thumb, and to do this every day until the vials of medicine and the wart was gone. But he must have seen the look of doubt on my face, because, again, feathers, smoke, mirrors, and he said, don't worry, it will go. So I took his words and I followed instructions. And I smuggled those vials back across the border and I applied that stuff every single day. And I wrapped the hell out of that wart. And after a month, the vials were empty, but the wart remained. And I just lost my mind. Like, this was my last ditch effort. Like, if not a witch doctor, who is going to help me? But I knew that there was nothing else I could do, right? And he told me not to worry, so I just had to put it out of my head. And so I tried. And then one day, I looked down at my thumb, and the wart was gone. Like, totally gone. Like, mysteriously, as it came into my life and plagued me, it was gone. And more remarkably, it never came back. Not the next day, not the next week, not the next year. And now, 10 years later, it's just a memory. And the only thing I have to remind me of that harrowing year and that crazy-ass trip is this scar on my thumb that tells me, you know, no matter what I like to think, I'm not in control. And more importantly, worrying never solves anything.
Jaime Windon.